The evening was quiet, filled with the soft hum of game sound effects and the occasional laugh echoing through their headsets. They had played together like this countless times before. It was routine now, comfortable, familiar. She sat curled up in her chair, half focused on the screen, half lost in the story she'd been reading lately. The Throne of Glass series had pulled her back in again, and her thoughts were full of its characters, its twists, its haunting tension. Between rounds, she started talking about it. Her voice carried that animated tone of someone who's completely absorbed in a world no one else can see. She spoke about a certain character, how their presence lingered even when they weren't there. 95% of viewers aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free, takes seconds, and makes a real impact. Click subscribe and be part of the growth. Please turn on the bell for more updates. He listened for a second, distracted by his controller, eyes locked on the screen. Then without a pause or second thought, he said, "I don't really care. It's kinda cringe." The words hit harder than they should have. Her voice stopped. Her hands froze mid-motion. For a moment there was only silence on the call, the kind of silence that fills a room after something sharp has been said. He kept playing, unaware of how his tone had landed. But something in the air shifted. She gave a small laugh that didn't sound like her, then fell quiet again. The game continued, but the light mood didn't return. When he asked if everything was okay, she said it was. She didn't want to sound dramatic, but her chest felt tight, her thoughts spinning around the words he'd thrown out so easily. Later that night, after the call ended, she stared at her phone. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like disappointment. She thought about all the times he'd talked about his interests. She didn't always understand them, but she listened anyway. She asked questions. She tried to care because he cared. That was what people did when they liked each other. And now she was wondering if maybe that had only gone one way. She typed a message slowly, hesitating before hitting send. "How would you feel if you were talking about something you enjoyed, and I said I didn't care and thought it was dumb?" It took a few minutes before he replied. He said she was taking it the wrong way, that he didn't mean it like that. He said he only meant cringe in the way people describe things made for younger audiences. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she answered. "It still hurt to hear that from you." He denied ever saying he didn't care, so she reminded him of his exact words. He paused, then said, "I meant I haven't read it, so I don't have any context to care." Her heart sank a little further. The explanation didn't make it better. If anything, it made it feel smaller, like her feelings didn't deserve space. She told him that because of how he'd said it, that was how she was always going to process it. After that, he left the message unread. Hours passed, no response. The next morning, a new message appeared, a short apology. He said he thought he had worded it differently, but through the rest of the day, he stayed distant, barely texted. She noticed. He wasn't angry exactly, but the tone was off. When she asked why, he said, "Your reaction didn't really equal what happened." And then, after a pause, added, "You went into an emotional response instead of thinking it another way." She read the words twice, then a third time. Something about them didn't sit right. He wasn't apologizing anymore. He was analyzing her. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she waited until later that night and said they should talk in person. Well, as in person as a call could be. When they finally did, his voice sounded tired. Hers did too. He said he didn't understand why it had become such a big deal. She said it wasn't about the book. It was about how small he'd made her feel in that moment. He said he was just being honest. She said honesty doesn't need to sound like mockery. They both went quiet. He sighed. She could hear it through her headphones. Then, more softly, he said, "I didn't mean to hurt you." She believed him. But she also knew that didn't change what had happened. There were small pauses between each sentence now. Both were careful, like walking over broken glass. She told him she needed space, just for a while. Enough time to think, to clear the noise. He said okay. The call ended, and the quiet that followed felt heavier than the silence the night before. Over the next few days, she tried to focus on her book again. She wanted it to feel like it used to. The excitement, the comfort, the escape. But every time she opened it, the word cringe echoed in the back of her mind. She remembered the tone he used, the way he'd cut her off mid-sentence, the way the laughter had vanished from her chest like air escaping a balloon. It wasn't just a passing comment. It was a moment that cracked something between them. He didn't message for a while. She didn't either. Part of her wanted to, but the other part wanted to see if he'd reach out first. He eventually did. When he called, his voice was quieter than usual. Not defensive, just uncertain. He said he'd been thinking about everything. That maybe he'd said it more harshly than he realized. That he wasn't good at reacting to things he didn't personally relate to. She listened. He sounded sincere. She told him she wasn't angry anymore, but that the whole thing had stuck with her. That sometimes it's not what's said, it's how it's said. He didn't argue this time. He just said, "I get it now." The conversation drifted to other things, slower, softer. There were still gaps, but they didn't feel as sharp. When they hung up, neither of them said, "I love you." Not because they didn't feel it, but because it didn't fit that moment. Days turned into a week. They still talked, but less often. When they did, things felt more careful. She didn't talk much about her books anymore, and he didn't bring them up either. But one night, he sent a picture of a bookstore. Just the front window, taken from his car. The message under it said, "They had your series in the front display." No apology, no explanation, just a small gesture. It was enough to make her smile for the first time in days. When they spoke again later that week, it felt a little lighter. He asked about her reading, not deeply, just a simple, "How's the book going?" But he asked, and that was something. She told him about it again, slower this time, watching for his reaction. He didn't interrupt. He didn't call it cringe. He just listened. The call lasted longer than either expected. For the first time in a while, she laughed, really laughed. And even though things weren't completely fixed, there was a sense that maybe they could be. Because sometimes, it's not one big moment that defines a relationship. It's 100 small ones. Some that hurt, some that heal. The night ended quietly. The last thing he said before they hung up was, "I'll call you tomorrow." She didn't know if he would, but when her phone lit up the next day with his name, she felt something inside her settle. Over time, the tension faded. They still had their differences, but he tried harder to listen. She noticed. He'd ask questions about her books, about the stories she liked. He still didn't read them, but he didn't have to. It wasn't perfect. Some days were easier than others, but the distance between them slowly began to close. Months later, they were at a small cafe together. She was reading again as usual, a paperback open on the table beside her coffee. He reached over, flipped the book around, and read the title. "That the one you were talking about?" he asked. She nodded. He smiled. "Doesn't sound cringe to me." She looked up, caught off guard for a second, then laughed. Maybe he meant it as a joke, or maybe he meant it as something else. Either way, the warmth that came with it was real. He reached across the table, brushed his fingers over her hand. The moment was small, so small it might not have mattered to anyone else. But to her, it did. Because this time, when she talked, he listened. And that was enough. The game nights came back. The easy rhythm returned. They still teased each other, still had their moments of frustration. But something subtle had changed in the way they spoke. The pauses between words were softer. The tone was gentler. She never forgot that night when he called her books cringe. It became one of those memories that lives quietly in the background, something that hurt once but doesn't sting anymore. And whenever he caught her reading now, he'd ask how far she'd gotten or who her favorite character was. She'd tell him. He'd nod, half understanding, but smiling anyway. Sometimes, that was enough. Thanks for watching Story Frame. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell for more updates. See you in the next video.